Welcome, everybody, to Through the Bulk. I'm Jason.
And I'm Robert.
And this is our first episode of the new podcast. And Through the Bulk's really going to be about exploring perspectives. With this project, we kind of just want to pick topics that are relevant by way of either how contemporary they are and prevalent in current media and pop culture, or just outstanding questions about reality, science, religion, history, pop culture, psychology, human behavior. There's really nothing off limits when it comes to Through the Bulk. And I'm happy to have this project here with Robert. We've kind of decided that today, for the first episode, we would kind of explore each of our individual worldviews so that we can kind of see through the lens of mine being much more materialistic and Robert's being much more on the side of being a Christian and religious person, how our worldviews differ on everything from the nature of reality up through social engagement. But even more importantly, and possibly more compelling, is how those things align with similarities. Much like our previous project, which was agree to disagree and still be friends, it's kind of the heartbeat of our project is to have varying perspectives that are generally considered to be separate poles, but through our friendship, we have found that there's many more commonalities and similarities than differences. And we've always been sort of enamored by that notion that guys with such varying worldviews could have so much in common. And that's kind of what we wanted to bring to the forefront with Through the Bulk. And today we're going to get to the heart of each of our worldviews and kind of discuss through each of our individual lenses what we believe in, what makes us tick, how we think the world works, maybe even so far as to what is the nature of existence and what maybe even happens after death. All of those things that are sort of associated with either a highly materialistic perspective or a highly supernatural and religious perspective. So I'd like Robert to kick us off and kind of introduce himself and maybe give us some insight on his worldview.
Yeah, so my name is Robert Blake, and my worldview is based in Christianity and having a strong belief in the Bible and that being my foundation. So when I look at, what's going on in the world, as I look at how to make sense of, why I work, why my family, those big questions that we all, wrestle with, for lack of a better word. It comes from a base of believing that God created the world as he said he did in the Bible, and everything that implies. I am a young earther, so that definitely is a biblical take on how the world came to be. And again, I guess the easiest way to kind of wrap up all of that is Jesus came, he said that all of it was true. And, I believe in him. I believe what he came for. And I believe everything that he represented. So, but when you get into issues of morality and, you know, just basic day-to-day life, even it has bearing because, I've got this measuring stick, if you will, that I have to apply to my thinking, to my reacting, and so as we dive into these various topics, that'll be where I'm coming from as a basis of how does that relate to what I believe in as far as God has designed things, and how does it make sense compared to the truths that I believe. So I guess it's a easiest way to wrap it up. We've had numerous long conversations, fleshing out what he believes versus what I believe. And like he said, the similarities and the differences, obviously. But what we've, some of the similarities that we've come to uh, realize is, we're both very compassionate individuals. We're both very caring about our family and our friends. We're both hard workers. Whatever we put our minds to, we are very devoted, and very kind. It's just one of those things with generous. Like those are similarities that you know I think have made our friendship last as long as it has, and grow into what it is. And you know, um, I think that's the lens that we should apply to what we're looking at. And that's what makes our conversations possible. Because when we run into hard concepts, we both know there's no malice. You know, like even if he disagrees with me or I disagree with him, neither one of us is going to attack or um, be ugly. It's more along the lines of, oh, I, I'm surprised you feel that way. But interesting. And then oftentimes I'll go away from our conversations, and some of the more challenging things I've had to think about came from conversations we had where I was like, okay, so how does that make sense? How does that come? Like if I put that perspective against what I know to be true, how does it make sense? So that's something I actually respect and love about our conversations. And we just feel like some of that perspective that we have gained and some of the perspective that we have shared with one another would be a great perspective to share with everybody else. So here we are.
Here we are. And I'm Jason Arnett. My worldview is more predicated on materialism. So I think if I had to be squeezed into some supreme box that describes me, it's probably that. And how that kind of extrapolates out is, well, my story is that I was kind of raised Christian, not often in the church. As an example, we didn't pray before meals and things, but God was not off the table. God was referenced often enough for me to know that I was Christian. We went to church on special occasions. I remember at a very young age, one of my first memories is being at Mass and taking communion. We weren't Catholic, but there was some Catholicism in the family. And so I have that as one of my first sort of foundational memories. So it was talked about. I believed. I had a personal relationship with Jesus. I knew enough about the Bible to know that that was part of the process, is to have a personal relationship. And so I prayed, and oftentimes I would pray for someone that I loved to live a long time. So it was cute, and honestly felt warm. And I'll say, coming out of that type of upbringing, I understand what religion offers people, at least an aspect of it, which is this comfort. I really enjoyed the notion of never feeling like I was completely alone. And when I did feel alone, I felt as though I could open up and talk to this supernatural, all-loving spirit in the sky. And that gave me a great sense of comfort. So, and it was a good feeling. I associate no negativity with that. Even now, as somebody who does not believe in anything supernatural, I still am connected to that feeling, that sensation of that supported, sort of all-encompassing, sort of unconditional love and warmth. As I got older and, you know, gathered some additional experiences and lived in different parts of the city, and got into different groups and organizations through being a musician, or being a salesman or a sales manager. Just life took me in a direction where I started looking at things through a different lens and from a different perspective, and kind of started really getting interested in science. So to the point where that's like my top content source, my number one source of entertainment, and my biggest sort of interest, even including music, is science, and specifically things like quantum mechanics, and the study of things at the very small scales that kind of make up the substrate of reality. And in exploring those topics to the degree that I've explored them through my deep and profound interest, I sort of didn't find any room for God. And I kind of felt as though what I'd been dealing with is God in the gaps, where I or society at large didn't understand some sort of aspect of nature. And so, therefore, God was kind of the concept. And when I started finding that there's a whole section of society that punches through that and doesn't stop with just that as the final answer and continues probing until some additional information is uncovered, I started to kind of feel as though there was really no room for God in my life. But nonetheless, some of the core concepts that are sort of the substrate of religion, specifically Christianity, the love, the forgiveness, those types of values, I still place a huge value on. And I'd say most people in my life, atheist or otherwise, feel similar. That's one topic I'd like for us to explore as we go on is, morality and how similar our morality and our our hearts are when it comes to compassion and things. Me being without religion and you being a religious person, there's a lot of similarities there. And I've always found that interesting. But yeah, I believe in science. I love how science is completely exploratory and is willing to change. When we look at theories of everything, whether it's general relativity and quantum mechanics, and the fact that we can't join those two things. A lot of the answers from the philosophers or from the religious people would tell you that's because God made it. That's why those two things don't jive. I am the type of person that believes that over enough time scale, we'll find the answers and it'll make more sense to us. So I would say if I had to classify me from that faithful spiritual perspective, I'm supremely agnostic. I honestly don't care what we discover. We could discover the face of God in the equations at the quantum scale, and I would be just as enamored as if we found that there was a programmer at the helm of the universe, or that it's complete randomness and that we are just a byproduct of entropy. I don't find any discomfort in that notion. That's one thing we've discussed recently was, my discomfort with not knowing and how it's the converse. I find supreme comfort and humility in not knowing. And at one point, I did feel small when I look at things through the lens of there being no intrinsic purpose to existence and reality and the universe at large. Now I find that to be very comforting. I find that it's humbling. I find that it puts us all on the same even playing field at the most fundamental level. No one is better than anyone else. We all share a similar experience of floating through the abyss of the cosmos. And anything that says otherwise is just social construct. Classes, wealth, superiority, race, it's all a construct to me. And all of it really has no intrinsic value. In other words, the only reason why any of those things make any sense is because we say they do. And I think the universe at large is kind of that. There is no intrinsic purpose to the universe and to reality and to existence. And the beauty that I have found through my life is that I have full credence to establish my own purpose. There's no predestination for me. I know that conflicts with some interpretations of quantum mechanics and how there is no free will, because if we had the equations to explain the position of every particle in the universe, we could predict the future to the perfect degree all the way through existence. There's people that believe that, and I think mathematically that may be true, but what I will say is that from the scale of reality that I live on as a human being, at this level, floating through the cosmos, I feel as though there is no intrinsic purpose, and that gives me full credence to establish and forge my own meaning, my own purpose. And I find that to be, if there is any meaning to life, whether it's established by me as the person driving this flesh car or whatever, that's what our purpose is to find our meaning. And for some of us, just existing is good enough. And for others, they have to make serious change. And what I love about reality, from my perspective, is that you have free will to explore any of those things, and none of them are more or less real than anything else. So that's kind of my worldview. I'm open-minded to a degree. I think we all have our limits, but for me, it's very important to be able to explain phenomenon, nature, existence. All of these things have to have some sort of science backing them for me to put any stock in those concepts from the perspective of being truth. And one thing that's known about science is that it does not set out and is not a method to prove anything other than things that are false. And that's one thing that you and I have struggled with kind of coming to terms with, is falsifiability. And that's how I feel about religion. It's not falsifiable, meaning there's no way to prove it true or false. It's just not a scientific topic. It's not a matter that can be viewed through that lens in any meaningful way. And me coming to terms with that fact in my own mind, plus my experience of being somebody who used to be a Christian, or at least believed in the same God that you believe in, I feel as that's given me a bit of an advantage in the way of sort of understanding where I stand in the conversation. And in other words, I can make no positive claims towards religion because there's no way to falsify religion itself. So any argument that I put up to try to do that is moot, and it's a fallacy in and of itself. And we've discussed in the past how that's my belief of religion in the context of debate or conversation, is religion, specifically Christianity, is founded on the Bible. That's the blueprint. That's the basis for all Christians' understanding of the nature of the universe, God and Jesus. And since that is not a falsifiable document at this point, the discussion of trying to falsify Christianity is a fallacy. It's an appeal to authority. So in other words, if I don't believe that the Bible is true and it can't be proven one way or another, at least through the scientific process, then it can't be dissected through science. What that's given me is the gift to have very broad, open, collaborative, and genuine conversations where the intent behind it is curiosity and trying to better understand other perspectives. And through that, I'm able to gather a lot of good practices and sort of angles on things that I wouldn't otherwise be able to gather. So I don't reject all of religion. I don't believe in a God nor the existence of one. I'm willing to be proven wrong if science can ever get us there. But there's plenty of things that you can take from the practice of religion and being faithful that I think are more than simply applicable to daily life. I think that they contribute to the goodness of humanity. But on the other side of that, there's a lot of things with organized religion in particular that I take great exception to. And when we see those played out throughout the course of history, I think some of those aspects do much more damage than they do good. And my job from where I stand in my head is I need to sample from the best parts of every playbook in order to live the life that I want to live. And that means being open-minded enough to do my best to fully understand the Christian perspective.
Yeah. And I'll just say, to piggyback off of what you were just saying, I think I brought this up before when we were talking, but one of the things that I think a lot of people do incorrectly is try to argue for or against, so like that would never be my stance. My stance isn't to try and debate somebody and convince them of the truth, because it's really more along the lines of what the gospel says is, this is good news. Here's what happened. You do with that what you will, and then there's evidence and things like that you could get into. But moreover, it's not a matter, like, if you wanted to go, there's so many apologetics and apologists that, we could go down those paths, but I would think we talked about it. It's like, there's a fundamental difference in the way we believe and the way we think that to argue about it, that really there's no point in arguing about it.
Yeah.
Like, it's one of those things where, you would have to, I don't even know what you'd have to do to convince me that what I have come to believe as the truth is untrue. And I know that you feel the same way. It'd be a lot. It'd be pretty profound.
From my perspective, and that's a question that I like to ask you, at least in time, what would it take? From my perspective, all it would take is presence, like an outward observable presence. So if God just peeked out of the clouds or from whatever dimension he's supposed to exist in, if he were to just pop out and make himself known, just a quick, hey guys, God, any type of objective, observable evidence, that's all it would take for me. And there's a part of me that wants that to happen because that would give me the answer to the supreme question of what is the nature of reality? What's the nature of existence? And my agnosticism is heavily founded on that notion. I just want to know the truth. And again, like I said at the front part of this conversation, I don't care what that truth is as long as that truth is evident to me to be so. And throughout the course of my life, and as I look more into, opposing perspectives or differing viewpoints, I just find less and less of a rational reason for there to be a creator, at least the Abrahamic God version of a creator. Um, from my perspective, the deeper we go into the nature of reality, it seems as though the less we understand and the more questions that pop up. And I think that's why I love science so much, specifically quantum mechanics and that exploration of things at the very, very small scale, because that's where reality's substrate exists. And as we get closer to it, it makes less sense. The more we're able to do with it, which is ironic that we can make more technologies and we can understand reality at much larger perspectives, the more we dig and deep into the bowels of it. But the less we understand about the bowels as we go in, the more questions pop up. And I find that to be the most interesting thing in the universe. And that's what keeps me up at night. That's what I make videos on. I just love that stuff. And I think what I love most is that the questions I have don't have answers. And that kind of leads me to my next large identifier of my perspective is the philosophical aspect. I love more than even science, philosophy. So the interpretation of reality through the lens of the human experience. That's what is most interesting to me. And science is a big part of that. My worldview is so heavily founded on this notion of exploring reality through the lens of science that extrapolating that out into philosophical principles is really intriguing to me. Someone like Sean Carroll, who's one of my favorite science communicators, authors, a great physicist. He's a theoretical physicist who really focuses on the quantum scale, and he now teaches philosophy at the university that he teaches at. It's physical philosophy, so it's philosophy as it pertains to the aspects of science that is current technology stops us from going any further. That's where his expertise kicks in, is he tries to tie that uncertainty to reality through the lens of philosophy. And I don't know that there's anything more interesting in the world than having those kind of conversations. And that's kind of what we're having today.
I would, yeah, there's so many directions to go.
There is.
Yeah.
Why don't you start with, we'll go into the cross-examination phase here, and maybe you can start that off by asking me a question that's on your mind from the perspective of you as a curious Christian towards me as a curious agnostic person. What's a question that you would have for me that would help you better understand how my worldview works?
Well, part of the reason I love Through the Bulk, and I'm so grateful that you're bringing me into that project in and of itself, is some of the stuff that you bring to light, or that you're examining.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me to point, more towards the evidence of a creator, and there is a lot of evidence. And the challenge is the scientific method as you've described it. I didn't go through a lot of, I guess I haven't had the teaching about the scientific method in relation to how you've brought it to light for me. But those things that you bring to light, a lot of them seem to point to some sort of intelligent design, and they're just so. You were talking about whatever that effect was. I forget the name of it.
Casimir effect.
Casimir effect.
Yeah.
Those things, they're so like powerful and so intentional, and like when you said earlier that all God had to do would be to show himself, the real implication there is that he would need to show himself to you.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
well, in my worldview, um, God did show himself to us. It was just Jesus,
Hmm.
and he came in and he performed various miracles. There's testimony of that, and obviously the testimony is the Bible, and that's where what you were mentioning earlier. So I guess my question would be, what evidence of that would you need aside from the Bible and the extra biblical evidence that was there of his existence? And
Yeah.
so like, because everything else, I guess, speaking to science and observation, as a Christian that looks at so many different things, let's just say the stars, you know, sometimes it seems like some of the things that are out there were just created to display his majesty as a gift from him to us.
Mhm.
It's, like it, maybe we don't understand how they came to be. And we've talked about, the time it takes for that light to get to from the star to here,
Mhm.
outdating what, young earthers would believe
Yeah.
as the age of the earth. And God is a God of miracles, and maybe that's the part that's hard, and because you can't disprove a miracle.
Yeah. I mean,
I
at
don't.
no point during that type of discussion or debate, rather, would be the context of that type of discussion. At no point do you not have the defense of, well, because it's God and he can do anything. He's omnipotent, he's omniscient, he's omnipresent. So when a discussion or an argument has that to fall back on at all times, which again is an appeal to authority, then you can see how that breaks down from the scientific method. And of course, the scientific method is far from perfect. I just believe that it is the best lens that we have to continue exploring reality. And the part of it that is so vastly and fundamentally different than religion is that it is amorphous. It does change. It does evolve, for lack of a better term, and it falsifies itself. It through its continued progress and through study and research, it is very capable and it's very common. It's preferred that it overturn previous understandings. And that's where a good, humble scientist comes into play and says the simple phrase, I don't know. When the question is asked where science has reached that boundary of our current understanding, the default phrase is, we don't know yet. And the optimism there is that in time, as we continue to plug away, we will find the answer. And religion is on the other side of that coin, putting a stop to that. It says, well, no, the answer is already there. It's the Bible. And so that's where the fundamental breakdown happens, is that one has all the answers already, and the other one is very self-aware that it has a lot of information, but the answers are always on the horizon. And once we discover something that we prove to be um, likely or repeatable through experiment and is good enough to found a theory on, it continues. And oftentimes in doing so, aspects of that theory are revised or outright dismissed. And science is very okay with saying that's part of the process. Don't be surprised if in 10 years we no longer believe this and we believe this. And it's very self-aware of that. And I think by the most conservative and the most literal, fundamental side of all religions, um, that's where there's a problem. That's not as understood. I see this in a lot in Christian apologists. Well, they'll refer to science as a religion, and why that is not true is that it isn't faith based. It's study based. It's an understanding that is, first of all, self aware and open to changing as time goes on. In other words, it's not rigid. As much as certain segments of society try to paint science out to be this rigid thing, and in many ways it is from the structure. The structure is what science is, but what that structure delivers in the way of knowledge is very, very capable of changing. I mean, if it didn't change, then it wouldn't be science. And that openness to understanding that what we know now pales in comparison to what we'll know in the future is why science continues to progress, but it's also why it's so in stark opposition to the religious or the creator side of worldview. So from your point of saying that a lot of my content that I make through the bulk, it almost seems as though I'm leading to this notion that there is a creator. Again, I'm very agnostic, and so I'm not opposed to that being the notion. I have a strong doubt that I'm ever going to believe that it's this Abrahamic God that's the creator. But, the most recent video I made was about simulation theory and why certain physicists and scientists at large believe that that is something worth looking into, is because of how reality at its most fundamental levels, at least to the depth in which we can explore, how much it behaves like code, how much it behaves like a predetermined set of parameters and laws, much like a program would be. And it can look like that. It's pixelated at its smallest scales, much like bits and bytes in the binary computing world. Obviously, it's much more robust than that. So it's, I think, more like a quantum computer in that it's a qubit at the fundamental aspects of reality versus just a bit or a byte. So it has some similarities to man-made environments such as programs. That doesn't mean that scientists believe that there's some geek in a basement, in the future programming our reality today. But I will say that simulation theory doesn't outright reject that notion. Maybe it is like a video game. Maybe there is a player. We're all NPCs, or maybe we all have this feeling of being the main character in this movie because we're the player-controlled character. I think that's fun to think about. I don't feel like that aligns with reality, but it's not so crazy, especially through the lens of pop culture and media, things like The Matrix, things like Ready Player One, these virtual worlds that exist in our imaginations and in reality. I mean, these binary environments do exist. They exist in computer code, but it doesn't make them any less real than anything else. And I do believe that a society that is fortunate enough to evolve into a place where we have Dyson spheres and we have the ability to traverse the cosmos and maybe even manipulate matter at the subatomic scale and even time itself, it's not off the table to assume that we would have the technology and understanding to create a simulation that's indiscernible from reality. And if that's the case, like I said in my most recent video, what if there's not only a simulation, but there's many simulations? Then that's where Elon Musk's famous quote of, stating that statistic of the likelihood of this universe being the real universe as opposed to a fake universe is very small. And that's mathematically true. When you look at it through the lens of simulation theory and start looking at the actual equations, the likelihood of this reality being, say, base reality is negligible at best. It's very infinitesimally small, which lends to my excitement, because the smaller I feel in this cosmos, the more excited I am. And I don't know why that is. I think mainly because the smaller I feel in relation to the larger reality around me, the more real it feels to me. The less fanciful it is, the more, in my mind, truth hurts, and the notion of us not being special in any way and us just being a byproduct of entropy, to me, that's invigorating, because it does give me this belief that purpose, mission, meaning, all of this is subjective and all of it's a construct. And that gives you full freedom to forge your own meaning. And there's nothing more liberating to my mind than that notion. And the further we go into exploring nature through the lens of science, the more that notion is invigorated inside of me.
It would be interesting to go down a path of, because I'd like to hear how you analyze, and obviously we don't have to do that on this one, but how you analyze the evidence that exists throughout, just, for example, a couple, and we can, you can obviously ask me some questions.
Yeah.
But like the Old Testament was the history of the Jewish people, and it was obviously orally passed down until they were able to write it down. But they experienced these things, and it was their testament that this stuff happened.
According to the book, it was their reality.
Well, yeah. And the book is just a written history.
Yeah.
So
Like a journal.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that at some point it'd be fun to maybe go down that path and see, what you do with the evidence, and moreover, as we continue to study the world from a biblical standpoint, there are things that pop up, that seem to imply that the Bible was telling the truth about this place historically, or this person, or this lineage.
Yeah, and I think that's my belief in religion at large, and the Bible specifically in the context of this conversation. I believe that that was at least a strong portion of society's truth at that time. I believe that they believed what they were writing was true. I don't believe that anything in the Bible, at least in its most original, pure form, I don't know, that changes a bit in my mind through the editorial process that is history, the game of telephone that is, the evolution of society. But nonetheless, I think at the heart of the Bible, the stories told within it are truth from the people that wrote it. And I don't believe there was any malicious intent. And I truly believe that it was reality from their perspective. But through that same lens, I see things like lightning believed to be an expression of Thor back in the day. You look at things like, or even maybe not quite as far back, but pretty far back, you look at things like Zeus, the pantheon that was the Greek and Roman gods. All of the religions that came prior to Christianity, they all did the same thing. And it's the same thing the scientific method attempts to do, and that's to explain reality. And I think that it's a beautiful articulation of perception of reality through the lens of people of that time. And much like, I mentioned the notion of God in the gaps. I think that's very evident in some of these myths where we're trying to explain natural phenomenon. The sun is chased by the moon every night and they battle, and then the sun wins the battle every day and comes back into the sky. That's a great way to explain that phenomenon of day and night and the cyclical nature of our world. Now, fast forward thousands of years, we know that we're living, well, most of us know that we're living on a sphere, or at least an oblate spheroid, and
We agree on that.
we're rotating, and the moon is in a tidally locked orbit with us, unusual compared to other moons in our solar system and at large. We don't know of any other solar systems that really have that type, not to my understanding anyway, that type of arrangement with their moon and the uncommonly large size of our moon in relation. But there's great theory that tries to explain that as well. I don't exactly remember where I was going with this point, but oh yeah, we now know, that we live in a solar system, and that the solar system is part of a larger galaxy, and extrapolate that further out in scale, and there's superclusters. And I've covered this in a recent video as well, the different scales of reality, going from the observable universe, which is as large as we're able to observe. That's where you see the cosmic microwave background. That's where you see the edges of the universe from our perspective, because of that notion of light speed, that from the lens of science sort of proves that the universe is much older than 6,000 years. And the beauty of that is that it's testable and it's able to be articulated in other forms as well, not only through, equations, but through expressions of that notion through technologies and things. But like to my other point, that also is disproved over time as well. And we're seeing with the James Webb Space Telescope, the universe is actually looking to be much older than we thought it was even. So these concrete notions of the Big Bang, which is fairly new in the scheme of science. What is that, the 70s that Big Bang theory was first postulated? It is 2026, so it's not that old. I mean, quantum mechanics is just over 100 years old right now. But that is also an articulation of the exponential growth that science has over time. Because we take note, we learn from the mistakes, and we hone the technologies, the understanding gets better. That understanding itself leads to further innovations and deeper exploration. So it doesn't just grow, it grows exponentially. That's how we're able to go from, 100 years ago inventing the automobile to now we have spacecraft that is outside of the solar system still sending us data. That's a huge leap. For thousands of years prior to that, we were hunting, gathering, apparently surviving floods and building arcs and things. We went from that to throwing things into space that are telling us about the cosmos in infinite high fidelity. And that's kind of the expression of science, is that because of how it works, it's exponential in how it grows. And so as time goes on, the duration of big gaps in science will continue to diminish. Now, we're never going to know, to my belief, we're never going to know every nuance of reality. I don't think our species will survive long enough to get to the bottom of every question that we've got. But I have a lot of pun intended, faith in science that they will continue to answer these large questions that I have on my mind about the nature of reality.
I identified one more commonality that I felt like it was poignant to bring to mind, and then you can ask me some questions.
Yeah.
I think you have some. Um, you said that science makes you feel small.
Mhm.
It's humbling and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And
Because of how real that makes it feel.
well, in the same vein, when I look at creation and I see the hand of the creator in it, I feel small. When I go to the Rocky Mountains, when I go stand beside the ocean, and I see the beauty in it, the only, I guess, one of the biggest difference, I shouldn't say the only difference, but one of the biggest differences is I see that and I'm grateful for what he's done for me in that stance, and but I still feel small and it's still beautiful and it's
Yeah.
still humbling. I have stood, you know, up at the top of one of the peaks in the Rocky Mountains, 14,000 feet up, looked around and just seen how small I am.
Yeah.
And I was just amazed at creation, you
Yeah.
know?
And you find
So
comfort in that.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
I think I share that sentiment. It makes me feel comfortable.
If anything, it's
Yeah.
hard for me to believe that it's just when I see the beauty, I guess one maybe fundamental difference would be it's hard for me to believe that it's just an occurrence of random, uh, it just happened
Yeah.
randomly.
Like, it's just an expression of entropy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I get that, and, I think where I diverge is that I find that to be the most beautiful thing. That smallness I feel, I should clarify, what it really makes me feel is meaningless, unimportant. My experience to the universe at large does not matter in any way, much like walking by an anthill, you don't even notice it. That's what I feel. If the universe was somehow conscious, that it probably wouldn't even know that I exist. And within that, I find a supreme and rather elegantly beautiful meaninglessness that truly gives me, as a conscious, shaved primate, the ability to make it my own and to like choose your own adventure novels when I was a kid. I loved those. What do we want to do next? I don't know.
I was the one to put my fingers and
Well, I think all of us cheated.
read a little way, and they're like, okay, whatever.
Yeah,
Like, I don't want to go that way.
yeah. Hey, it's like a bit of like supreme knowledge of the future. You can take a peek and let that influence. And what's funny is physics is kind of now telling us that causality is not necessarily linear, meaning stuff that happens in the future does affect the now. And that's another beautiful phenomenon being explored in science. How does that make sense? I don't know. It makes as much sense as a god to me. It's very thought provoking and full of curiosity.
I mean, he would see it that way because he's, timeless.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see where that thread of,
Yeah.
that's what I think is the beauty of what we're doing here is just adding perspective, varying perspectives
Yeah.
to when those things happen because, like you never know. We all might learn from each other and, grow because of it. And,
Yeah.
you know, that is more beautiful than any of it is like growing together, learning together and finding common
Yeah.
ground.
We're all on the same ride. We're
Yeah.
just maybe looking out different portholes.
Yeah.
And that's totally fine. It's still the same existence, just through different lenses. And I think a lot of people take exception to that and aren't necessarily advocates for that type of thinking. I and you seem to be on the other side of that, to where you can gain something from every perspective, even if it's what not to do and not how to be. You can still learn something from everything. That's kind of the way I look, and that's what I think this gift, for lack of a better term, in this moment of consciousness and being aware of one's existence and being aware that the people surrounding you also have that same internal experience, and being able to recognize that and use developed senses like empathy to let that help forge our social hierarchy to a degree. It's stunningly beautiful, and there's no other animal on earth that has it to the degree that we do. which is supremely interesting. And of course, can make you start to wonder if you are special because there's no other animal on this earth throughout the course of all of its existence, whether you're a young earth creationist or you're someone like me who believes the earth's been here for a really long time, it's still safe to say that there's not been a creature quite like us. And a creature that is able to not only know of its own mortality, but to be aware that other people have those same sets of awarenesses is really unique to the human experience from where I stand. Now, is there life out there in the cosmos that has transcended that question and has better answers? Math says yes, but the Fermi paradox says no. So I don't know. Um, but I would say as we continue to gather each other's perspective and through this exercise of cross-examination, big question I've got for you is, how do you, as somebody who I know to be supremely rational, someone who's educated, someone who's had a lot of work experience and has gathered perspective for many decades from many different sources, lived different lifestyles throughout the course of your existence here on Earth, how do you reconcile that giant divide in the scientific lens and the young earth creationist lens, with science telling us that, life exists on earth billions of years ago, and evidence through evolution and charted science that's peer reviewed and is such a part of the lexicon that other sciences are blossoming from it? How do you reconcile your beliefs of the earth being the age that it is and created by God with the information that is so beautifully articulated through the lens of science? How do you traverse that without this supreme feeling of like cognitive dissonance?
Well, I don't think that I feel any cognitive dissonance, and your your description made me feel like I'm like way older than I am, sitting here on a pipe and like, yeah.
Older than most people that listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of the age we're at.
um, I don't believe I have any cognitive dissonance. I just feel like there were enough holes punched in what I was, for lack of a better word, force fed through my public schooling and everything like that. There were enough holes punched in that to not trust it. And the Bible just so I came from, I think to extrapolate the answer for what you're asking me, I came from secular humanism and the world, like I was raised in a family where my parents were like, go figure it out on your own. They didn't force feed any kind of
Yeah.
Christianity on me, any belief structure, really. I think there's a hodgepodge. My dad, I think, would have probably more aligned with your belief structure than mine. And then my mom actually came to be a Christian before she passed, and uh, in 2020, she passed away in 2021. But I got to see her come to faith. But to build upon it, I guess it was just one of those things where there's inconsistencies, and as I've come to understand it, like the measuring tools and things like that, and the science, the answers are so widely varying in different aspects, that for me, the Bible hasn't changed. God hasn't changed, and there's a consistency there. There was enough evidence and reason, and that's one of the things, again, we'll have to revisit maybe, is when I look at scientific, I look at the evidence, and or I was going to say the evidential, but the evidence that kind of points towards what was being said in the Bible actually being real. And then you have logic and reason with these guys that followed Jesus and how things would have had to play out, but uh, for lack of a better way of putting it, God said so, and I know that's the argument you don't want to hear. But it's weird.
Not so much that as it's the rebut that prevents this conversation from being scientific?
Well, so the the evidence that points towards Jesus' existence and his um, actually being who he said he was is enough for me to believe him and validate his authority. And he points back and says that it's all true.
Mm-hmm.
And as you expound upon that, like it can sound kind of silly that Moses basically had a fever dream and he came down from the mountain and all of Genesis was a dream.
Mm.
It was revealed to him through that medium, and he comes down and he shares it with the Jews, and everybody was like, sounds feasible. And I get the stance too that it's all very uh, mythical.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's just not been enough evidence to disprove it for me. And the root is Jesus. So like that's he was a Jew that believed all of that, grew up believing all of it, and affirmed it before he was crucified and rose again. And there's just, if that's true, that's true. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of that, and I'm pointing so you guys can't see it, but if Jesus's crucifixion is true and everything that it implies is true, the Bible's true. And that, I get that, it's an appeal to authority, but that's where, and what I keep pointing back to is the scientific. It'd be fun to see how an analytical mind like yours goes through the evidence that points to the existence of Jesus, and how, not to go down that rabbit hole too much, because I don't. This isn't a sermon. I'm not a preacher.
Right.
I'm just a believer. But where's his body? What happened? What, like, there's so many questions that are raised. And then why would these guys go to their death defending the truth of it all if it was a lie? Like, we've proven under duress, most of us are cowards. In like, if it came down to just refute it or die, if it was a lie, most of us are gonna go, okay, I was lying, don't kill me.
Yeah.
None of those guys did.
Sure.
So there's just layers.
Yeah.
Um, if you go into the science of it, there's also evidence of, you know, quick cataclysmic change that happens, that you can terraform an area in a matter of days, and it's totally different than what it was. So like, when a volcano, like, for instance, God forbid, if Yellowstone was to erupt right now, the whole western half of the United States would look totally different. And 100 years from now, people might look at that and go, this means something totally different than what we know it to mean. I'm just saying, like, there would be ways that people would have to reconcile what happened there, but it would be different enough that it wouldn't be the America that we do, because
Oh, absolutely.
that's a super volcano that's going to destroy a good portion of the Rockies, and Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, all of that is going to be a crater. So that's, if that ever happens, it would be cataclysmic, and a global flood is cataclysmic. So like, it would totally terraform the world from what we knew it to be. And there's enough in there for me to at least question what science was bringing forward, and a solid answer came through biblical revelation. I guess it would be the best way
Sure.
to answer. It's just, And then when I see things like, I mean, I talked about this recently. I see, I went through nursing school and I got to see an embryo from conception, and these wonders, these amazing things that happen, and they seem so organized and so intentional. It was like I only grew in my faith. It only made it stronger. So I hope that answers. There's a lot going on there, but
Yeah,
like
no,
it's
it helps me better understand your perspective.
yeah,
That's a tough one for my mind to fully grasp, is to see such profound evidence that continues to further our understanding of the nature of the universe. How the further we get with that, the further it diverges from what's outlined in the Bible. And to your point, the Bible never changes, but science does, and science accommodates for understanding as it evolves. So I think that's where I find it harder in my mind to reconcile, is how we can have such a litany of evidence that clearly at this point does not prove the nature of even life. Like the origin of life is not yet understood. There's hypothesis and theory being formulated. There's a good understanding of the ingredients and the circumstances, obviously much more so now than ever before in history. But we're still not to a point where we can actually definitively say that this is how life, and this is the moment in which life originated on Earth. So, I mean, let alone the nature of reality at large, Like I said before, the James Webb Space Telescope is showing us that the age of the universe, based on our previous understanding, the Big Bang Theory, is not quite in alignment. It seems to be a little bit older. There's galaxies that formed way sooner than we believe that they should have by our current understanding of the laws of, of physics. And so I feel like that's leading to some great revelations. I think the James Webb Space Telescope is one of the greatest inventions of humankind, and just the information it's given us in the short time it's been out there is striking. Um, and if there's other studies that are showing that the expansion of the universe is slowing, so that kind of also helps rewrite our understanding of the Big Bang Theory. Inflation theory in and of itself is suspect in many ways, and it was prior to the James Webb Space Telescope going up. But I love that about science, is that it's willing to admit when it's made some mistakes, adjust, and move forward. And its moving forward is still under that predication that what we discover next might be altered by what we find after that. And again, the nature of science to not so much prove something true as to prove things false, I find to be brilliantly elegant, and elegant enough and beautiful enough for me to feel invigorated and optimistic and hopeful through the meaninglessness and infinitesimally smallness that it makes me feel. So I'm fortunate enough to have a mindset to where the smaller I feel because of the universe that's still expanding around me, the more comfort I find. And if I didn't have that comfort, then I imagine myself having the converse of it, which would be a ever growing anxiety and existential dread, which I fortunately don't have, because that would be a terrible way to live out this life that is just a blip on the radar of the universe's existence. I think this is a good topic to kick the series off with. And it kind of, I think, helps establish each of our worldviews in a way that helps listeners of future episodes kind of understand where we're each coming from, and maybe even have a little bit of excitement and optimism in the upcoming episodes to be able to understand that it's going to be discovered, whatever these topics are that we put on the docket, it's going to be discovered through two very independent lenses. And what I look forward to is finding not just the differences in our perspective as we uncover phenomenon and topics and social, concerns and things, but the similarities that we'll be able to discover as we discuss these topics through our very different but equally valid lenses. So I want to thank everybody for joining. And if you're still with us, thank you so much for staying with us and listening to us explore each other's personalities. And we look forward to whatever the next episode brings. But I'll tell you what it will be. It will be interesting, and it will be explored through two very different lenses that hopefully arrive on very similar understandings of one another. So I'm Jason.
I'm Robert.
And thank you so much for joining us on Through the Bulk, and we will see you next time.